In the time of Queen Victoria, Great Britain was the hegemonic power of that century. It was before the United States. The United States would get the hegemony of today. So Great Britain was, and France in some other ways, were the countries that dictated the fashion of the time, dictated the trends of the time. So what was happening in England that at the same time was paralleled by the Industrial Revolution. And so the developments in science, in technology, and arts, and even way of life were exported as part of the policies of the empire. The style of architecture in that time was the neoclassic, was the prevalent style. But the neoclassic got mixtures and eclecticisms with all of these revival ideas. So the result was, as we would say, like a tutti frutti, like a hodgepodge of styles that in some way similar to what today we call postmodernism, that is basically nothing new, but the novelty is that mixing of elements, that eclecticism produces something that looks like new, but in reality is the reuse, the reutilization of all of these previous styles. We had the Renaissance that was based in Greco-Roman elements. As a continuation of the Renaissance comes the Baroque. As the Baroque becomes excessive, the Baroque becomes too ornate, too much exuberant decoration, that led to a style called the Rococo. People got tired of that so much theatricality and exaggeration of the forms, and the architects decided to go back to something simpler. So in coinciding with the 19th century approximately, people return to the basic forms of the Greco-Roman art that has been like the paradigmatic style of Europe. This kind of architecture, the Victorian architecture, could be in the border of what we would consider today tackiness or corniness, because this architecture, if you don't combine it well, you produce really a very patchy thing. So, but the interesting thing, and what makes this architecture to be remarkable, is that difficult combination and integration of diverse elements of different cultures through time were synthesized with a very good taste in general. There are Victorian buildings and constructions of this time that, in my opinion, are of bad taste, of course. But the majority of the main buildings, if you walk in London, in downtown London, in one of the shores of the Thames River, you will see powerful buildings made in this style, and they are basically aesthetic buildings. They are well-made buildings, but it's very difficult to create a style that can have an aesthetic value in conditions like this. That would be my commentary. Angelino Heights is probably the area that we can say that is more Victorian and is more real, because it's a neighborhood developed in that time and continues to be in their real location. Because in Lincoln Heights there is an area called, a place called Heritage Square, where they relocated Victorian buildings and all other similar buildings from different neighborhoods because they were going to be destroyed by the growth of the city. So they, instead of destroy them to build a bank or something modern, they saved them, they disassembled them, and they relocate them there in this area that is located in 43th Street, Lincoln Heights, and Freeway 110. In fact, you can see it from the freeway when you are passing. You see the houses that look like the houses of the Addams family. History is cyclical, and the Victorian experience of architecture was a way to synthesize under the shadow or under the blanket of the British Empire the idea of power, of all the elements that symbolize their conquests and the presence of their empire in different places overseas. So they wanted to try to possess a little bit of that into their own land. So that gives that uniqueness and that exoticism to the architecture of the Victorian era. And that situation, sometimes being the history cyclical, that situation repeats again. For example, we are, and this, what I'm going to say is very controversial and subject to big debate. We enter in the 20th century to a process known as modernism, and later we can speak after the 1950s that our architecture is contemporary architecture. So the problem is what comes after the contemporary.